Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Courtney Staples and C.R. Rowenson. Clark, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Always great to be here.
Absolutely. And Clark, if they were interested in you and your content, where can people normally find you and your content?
Yeah, so the best place to find my content right now is on YouTube. The channel is The Magic Engineer, all one word. And if you want to reach out to me or view some of my older content, you can find me at crrowenson.com. Those are the best places to find me.
Absolutely. And before we dive into today's episode, which is I feel like it's been a very long time since we've done these, and we've never done one with Clark, so I'm very excited to do this. Today's episode, we're doing a monster mash, which is where we basically take the archetype of a monster, the concept of a monster, we roll it through the kind of jam stuff that we normally do with our settings, and then we try and create scenarios that push the limits of what that monster is and how it kind of works with how that kind of happens. It's really fun. I think the last time we did one of these was our Minotaur episode, which I absolutely ended up loving. Courtney, can you confirm that? Or have we done another one since then?
No, I think that was the last one. But yeah, that was a lot of fun, but it has been quite a long time since we've done one of these. Yeah.
Yeah. It is my goal that we do more of these fun little one-shot episodes because, I mean, we will always have a backlog of settings to get to and tenets to work through. However, I think that'd be kind of fun to kind of, work through some one-shots like these from time to time. If you disagree or you want to see more stuff like this, like the Monster Mash, like the jams and whatnot, you can always email us or just talk to us on Discord. And you can find most of that through our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can also click a link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll build your world. That's normally what we do, but today it's a little bit different. If you'd prefer to follow us on social media, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. Or, like I said, we've got a Discord. Come chat with us. Let us know what's going on. If you really like the Monster Mash type stuff or you want us to stick mostly to the setting design that we normally do, that's a great place for you to tell us. We really appreciate any kind of opinion that you might have, good or bad, or even indifferent, right? And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous, or you just want to give us like a nice little thank you, you can always go to our Patreon and get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies like Aphid Lounge episodes, which are effectively like a monthly extra podcast that we give that isn't necessarily Courtney, would you say that it's fair that they're tangentially related to world building?
I feel like they're usually at least kind of related to world building. Sometimes you kind of go off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we'll just say that they're always interesting.
Yes.
Let's go with that. Because the last time I was on the podcast, it was on one of those, and that one was amazing because we were doing maximum gross out with body horror, and that was fascinating and fun.
An excellent plug. If you want to go listen to all three of us be as unhinged as we're allowed to be about body horror, I think that there's a lot of like placenta and like body horror related to birth in that episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that or any of our regular content, go ahead and pop on over to our Patreon where you'll get access to that among other great, interesting goodies, but no pressure if you're not.
I know it's really tempting to, go listen to this episode about placenta horror, but it is good. It is
actually no. I agree. It's a very interesting. Like I think that being able to talk about like really weird and dark stuff was especially because like believe it or not, despite my personality online, I do try to rein it in, and I do in fact try and rein in my co-hosts when possible. And I think for that episode, I'm just like, I'm turning that switch off and we're just going. So yeah, it got weird and dark really fast. I mean, it's got the three of us on it. So yeah, obviously that's a thing that's going to happen.
So Aphid Lounge, you don't really know what you're going to get, but it's going to be interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a joke I can't tell here. It's a joke I can tell in the Aphid Lounge. Anyway, let's get into the episode. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and roll some dice and figure out which monster we're going to be focusing on today. So the way that this normally works is we each bring 4 to 5 monsters, we add them to a list, and then we roll randomly on that list. So now Clark has added his 4, which are werewolves, chimera, jiangshi, which are the Chinese version of the hopping vampires. And then, Clark, you're going to have to pronounce the last one for me if you don't mind.
I mean, I don't know if I can pronounce it right either, but Penandalan.
Sure. And for those of you who might not know that one, that is a Malaysian, it's a floating head that has entrails falling out of it. Is that, Clark, why don't you describe it? It's one of your favorites.
Yeah, so they are supposedly spirits of wronged women or sinful women, but they are the floating heads of women that will fly around dragging the entrails of their body behind them. And depending on where you look, the organs are kind of prehensile or they're not. Sometimes they say that they have to return back to their body, whereupon they reform into a whole woman and rest. But just the floating head with the entrails attacking people that should give you an idea of the kind of stuff I like. So
I was going to say it is so on brand for you, Clark. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's go ahead and roll some dice. That might not even come up. We're going to find out, I suppose, right? So the monster that we're focusing on for today's Monster Mash is going to be Clark. I don't know how you got this in one shot, but we got Chimera. And honestly, look, Chimera are interesting in their own right? Like, when you say chimera, are you talking about them as a loose archetype of just an amalgam of other animals and creatures? Or are you thinking very specifically lion, goat, snake?
Both are my favorites. I like I like the general blending, which again, no surprise if you've listened to any of my stuff, but I do like the standard Greek chimera that's the blend of these 3 animals.
Gotcha. And obviously, right, chimera are also have been used to represent, I'm thinking of immediately Full Metal Alchemist, right, where they're like fusions of different organic materials put together, right? Which, again, also a big Clark staple if you've ever engaged with any of his content as well. All right, well, we've got our chimera. So let's see what genre we have to stick them in this time and see how we're working with them. So our genre that we're dealing with is... Okay, this is rigged. This is legitimately rigged. I rolled an 11 on the die, which Courtney can attest to you is a body horror genre.
Wow.
Okay.
So I swear we don't cheat on this. I know every time I come on, somehow the things that I have added to the randomly generated tables end up coming up. There's no shenanigans going on here. I promise you.
Yeah, no, I'm somewhat mad about this, but not really. Anyway, maybe the theme will kind of elucidate or guide us towards a more interesting topic. So maybe we can hang our hooks on the theme here. And our theme this time is... Okay, sure. We're looking at growth/expansion. Okay. And then the first thing that we're focusing on here is going to be an historic event. All right. So, Clark, you're barely a guest at this point, but you do still get to go first. So why don't you hit us with your... And obviously, it's your monster. You brought it. So where is your brain going? We've got a theme of growth and expansion. We've got a chimera. We're sticking with body horror for now. Crank the knob and snap it off. What do you got for us?
Honestly, what I think would be really interesting is to take this in a direction where chimera is actually a class of animal that just with the growth. What was it? It was growth and
expansion.
And expansion. I'm just really fixating on that growth and expansion so that maybe chimeras aren't the same in different places, because as the culture that uses them or is connected to them grows and expands depending on where you're at. They adapt and they change. That's where my brain is going.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I like that. I would also like to focus on the body horror aspect as well. Like when we roll body horror as a genre, I'm thinking very specifically of something like The Fly or something like basically either of the Cronenbergs, right? And by that I mean the directors of the Cronenbergs, you know, like Skinamarink or you know what I'm talking about here, right?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and figure out, like, I would like to try and focus this to be as personal as possible if we can, or at least create a scenario that kind of is emblematic of this kind of chimera relationship or this kind of chimera monster, right?
Yeah, my mind had right away, not surprisingly, gone to Annihilation because that sort of deals with all of
Mark
that.
it on the bingo card,
Yep.
ladies and gentlemen.
Pretty much.
We got it down. We just got to get to Octavia Butler, and you'll get a free gift
that'll
card.
be soon. That'll be soon.
Yeah. All right. So what are we doing with growth and so can I tell you where my brain went for some reason?
Yes.
When I was thinking of growth and expansion mixed with body horror, I was actually thinking about some kind of like hunger or weight gain or consumption that is like expanding the human body to like grotesque points, right? So when I'm thinking of body horror mixed with growth, that means physical growth, and it means like expansion to bulbous obesity or something like that. I don't know why my brain is going that way right now, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Or like Akira at the end when he kind of gets all
See, and I'm I'm trying to take like a step past my normal urges, but maybe I should just like give in because that's what the dice told us to do.
I mean, it's body horror, yeah.
But I don't know. I guess I'm starting to see two different things develop here. One is I'm sort of picturing because I guess I wasn't clear. The body horror I was sort of thinking of with the Chimera is as they move and expand into different areas, the way they change is melding with some of the native life forms.
Right.
Okay.
So like if you had a Chimera that was in an ocean bay, it's going to be, instead of it being like a lion and goat and snake, it might still have the lion and the snake, but have melded with some shark or melded with some manta ray or something like that.
I think you're missing a big opportunity by missing like chitin or something like that, like a crab or like a lobster or something like that as well.
Yeah. So there's those kinds of creatures. I do also really dig what you've been talking about, which my brain is now dumping out kind of like a blend between Akira and the Zerg almost.
Yeah.
Where it just becomes this sprawling mass that is taking over, but then it has like these individual animals and people that are still like connected to it through these weird tethers that are they basically become flesh puppets that can move around within the zone and stretch a little ways outside it.
I think I've got an idea for like the scenario that we can kind of craft here, right? So if we're keeping to the theme of growth and expansion, I'm thinking that this is actually a sci-fi setting, which I know is weird for me. I'm normally the fantasy person, or at least the horror person, but I'm guessing that there are some star explorers who crash land on a habitable planet, and they encounter all sorts of weird monsters and maybe some sentient or semi-sentient races. They're hunted, and obviously, you know, like their rations eventually run out, and so they have to start eating, you know, like the flora and fauna of the land to figure out, you know, like they get desperate, they get hungry. And in doing so, they realize that consuming these native species are actually forcing them to blend in with their bodies. So they're slowly transforming into the things that they eat, right? And we can keep all of Clark's kind of, you know, geographical specific chimera and have that play out in like the exploration by this very small group of survivors and whatnot. And then, you know, the body horror is watching, you know, like you are forced to eat, right? Like you have to eat to survive. So it's not like do you either choose to die or do you choose to be a monster of your own making? Like, so you can at least have a chance at, like something, like some kind of savior coming.
So the flesh itself is mutagenic when you eat it?
I think what happens is that when you eat this flesh, it somehow changes you and maybe makes you more mutable as well. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
That is very annihilation-y. Not necessarily food, but in the book, at least, the main character ends up breathing in some spores in this alien area that they're exploring. And that sort of triggers a change in her. But then others in her group are exposed in other ways, and they also start to change in different ways. It's interesting, though, because I was kind of thinking the opposite in terms of genre. But I think we can still make it work, where I was imagining like a very pre-industrial kind of primitive time, like a more fantastical setting where you have these tribes who maybe it's one tribe in particular, or maybe it's multiple tribes that have done this, that like pick somebody to become their not mascot, but their
avatar.
Their avatar, essentially, yeah.
Sure.
And that's the person who is bestowed with these gifts of having all these things grow into them and turn them into different things based on, like Clark was saying, their geographical location, what they can actually merge with.
Okay. I like that idea. What I'm concerned about in that particular concept, though, is like, this is body horror, right? So how do we crank up the horror elements? Because what you're suggesting is like, you're basically creating biomutant superheroes when you do something like that, like to create the avatar, right? So
definitely not picturing them as looking super heroic.
Well, no. But I mean, like in terms of like a fantasy that you're indulging in, you're creating this like kaiju / super beast of a monster, right? By creating this avatar. So I'm thinking that like part of horror is, like what do you reject? What are you afraid of? Right. And when it comes to body horror specifically, it's about like bodily decay or bodily betrayal. And so I want to emphasize that in creating Chimera, something has to be lost, right? Like you might be gaining, like the strength of a bear, but what do you lose in return? And the obvious thing is humanity, right? Like that's always how body horror normally works or usually works, right? But let's like, I would really like to try and emphasize as much as possible, like how can we make this horrifying in a way that is not usually horrifying? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I do like kind of the sci-fi element. I'm gonna paint a picture real quick and see what you guys think.
What do you got, Caravaggio? Let's hear it.
Basically, take Avatar the movie. For whatever reason, all of the life forms had this basically dangling brainstem that you could tap into. But instead of that, it's basically an umbilical that feeds back into the ground or a tree or something somewhere. So they're literally tethered. There's some flexibility and it can move and meld through material in weird ways. And that's because in different regions, there is a underlying growth that is spreading that started from a single organism. And by consuming its flesh, you start yourself on one of two paths, or I guess one of three paths. One is if you delve too far, you end up part of that mass, and you are now another one of these creatures tethered to the spreading subdermal growth. Or you stay separate and become one yourself, or you have this third one where if you have to find a way to stop the process partway through, but the changes can't be reversed.
So it's about choice in that way, right? Okay.
Choice combined with the thing of when you're in a situation where you don't have that choice, it starts to become a ticking clock of like, we've got to figure out a way to feed ourselves because otherwise that's our fate or that's our fate. Both of them are awful because we're either going to become part of this thing or I am going to become a new thing. And then you guys are going to have to deal with two of them.
Right.
Because I'm no longer going to be your ally. I'm going to be this pseudo terrain spanning amalgam. And then that's where it becomes a body horror ticking clock, where how much your body
Right.
changes tells you how much time you have left.
Okay, I like that a lot, actually. I think that we can probably. So I'm thinking that, we're looking at these things as, like purely flesh beasts, right? But the idea of the umbilical really reminds me of something that is more akin to like fungi. So it's a matter of like a hyper intelligent and incredibly expansive network of fungus, right?
Yeah.
And what can happen then is maybe, like, to kind of bring in a little bit of annihilation, like Courtney was kind of talking about, there's some kind of process where the umbilical cord gets like hooked under your skin, and all of a sudden that's what starts these changes,
Hmm.
And I don't know, that's kind of where my brain is right
Well,
now.
and maybe if we wanted to, different masses, because I can't think of a better term, but different masses have different mechanisms for trying to draw in new creatures.
Yeah.
So you have one,
Mm.
because I do love that image of you go to sleep on the ground and you wake up and all of a sudden there's like stuff that has been stung into your arm that just
Yeah,
goes into this tendril that's leading into the earth.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can have stuff like that, or it can be like the longer you're in this environment, just being there, breathing the air, surviving, you
Mm.
start to change and start to become more like the other surroundings, or it can be
Oh.
part of this consumption base. That can be part of the regional
Hmm.
difference, right?
Yeah,
Is
Yeah.
and
maybe
then
the
Yeah.
different masses have adapted different techniques to
mm.
integrate new,
Hmm.
to grow and extend their reach.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
I
I
was
like
going
that.
to say that ties directly into growth and expansion as well, right? Like, we think that the main characters of this narrative are the humanoids who have been dropped into this area, when in reality, and unbeknownst to them and the audience, that is actually the land masses themselves that represent this kind of mass of, like flesh that is slowly taking them over. Like, in my brain, I'm thinking of this as a metaphor for like the honey catcher plant, like those
Hmm.
carnivorous ones that
Hmm.
dissolve like insects in the acid and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So this is basically what it's doing, is that it like you said, Clark, there are myriad ways that, like it kind of like catches prey. And in this case, what it does is just it turns the prey into part of its ecosystem.
Hmm. And oh, you know what? If we wanted to go with the sci-fi route, this is stretching it a bit, but I also am suddenly really drawn to the idea of it not just being biological functions, but it being able to develop advanced functions. So if somebody crash lands on this planet where one of these exists and they get subsumed by this organism and then it
Mm.
subsumes their ship, all of a sudden this one has learned how to do radio waves.
Mm.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Oh
it can
God.
actually
Yeah.
start sending out like distress signals,
Hmm.
which will then make it so it doesn't have to be physically linked anymore.
Oh.
And that can start being where it's like
Okay.
spreading out through space, and you have these weird reaver ships that are collecting things and then bringing
Sure.
them back to the original mass. And we could go
Hmm.
really crazy
Mm.
sci-fi directions with that.
Yeah, no, I really love that. I think that's really
Yeah.
cool,
Me too.
because now we're expanding the story, and I'm thinking that like the reason that this ship even tried to land on this planet to begin with is because it was answering a distress call,
Hmm.
right? So I think what we're seeing is that it is advanced to this level, and then the future of it could be something like, oh, it's now able to like launch itself into space, and now all of a sudden we've created a prequel to the thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. But Courtney, let's hear some of your thoughts on this one, because Clark and I have been banging on about this for a bit. So what do you got for us? Are you down? Are you currently down with a sci-fi setting with this conceit?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fine.
Okay.
When you were talking about the plants dissolving their food inside of them, I thought about like the bodies of water on this planet and how those might also be methods for certain masses to grow and to take things over. Like if you
Mm,
Oh
not just
yeah.
drinking, but even like bathing or washing your clothes in a body of water, and it's able to somehow maybe take some of your DNA through that process and start to replicate some of your qualities in itself, while also
mm.
probably dissolving you gradually.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, so we've got the conceit down now, right? Let's focus a little bit more on the chimera part here, right? Because this is the monster mash, right? We gotta make sure that the monster is front and center here. So how can we ensure that the monster is the scariest thing on the screen and not the nettles burrowing into your arm and turning you into part of that monster?
I think when we see it starting to adapt and send new forms after our characters, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And like at a certain point, I feel like I'm just like rehashing all of my normal ideas in just a slightly different way. But if that's a thing where as you're engaging, you don't know what's going on at first, and it is these weird things that are attaching to you, but then you start to see the environment changing around you and starting to understand the scope of what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And, one day you're dealing with these kind of simian creatures, but you're able to hide away in your ship. And then the next day they have they have bone crowbars that their arms have melded into. So it's adapting and modifying, like kind of not completely on the fly, but then you can also have sort of this rapid life decay cycle, which would be very unnerving to watch.
Ooh, I like
Yeah,
that a lot, actually.
And when you realize that it's all one thing, at that point, everything becomes terrifying because you're like, I don't know. Are these plants part of it? Is that thing that I saw part of it? What does it want? What's it doing?
Or like a molting type of phase rather than just life and death, but it's constantly like shedding its skin and changing forms that way. Like you come across these husks in the wilderness and it's like,
oh, that's
wait,
good too.
I just saw this yesterday. Shit, what is it now?
I mean, I was also thinking that like the land itself is the mastermind behind all of this, right? Like it's creating these chimera kind of like to figure out, like the best way to kill you. And also at the same time, it's kind of trying to create an apex predator, So like maybe it's like the only way that it can advance and evolve is by like throwing as much of its biomass at you as possible to learn and then force the things that it's creating to become more ferocious. And maybe we see that in the narrative, right? Where it's like, oh, they killed, the first thing so easily and, they thought nothing of it. And then the next round, it's like, oh, well, shit, that's a really scary land mammal. And so we had to swim away to get to it. And then the next time you see something, it is now adapted. And then each time they realize like, oh shit, this thing is adapting faster than we can probably take care of. Like there's that escalation to it, right?
And in terms of a reason for this to exist, like that feature to exist, I also really like the idea, this can get overplayed in horror movies, especially when they do it as the last final sting, but just realizing that there's not just one of them. Because if you're thinking about it, like, why does something need to adapt this much? But if that's part of how these separate organisms fight with each other and try and claim biomass and territory from the other, like one, that would be really odd to watch if they show up and at one point you see a herd of stag that are like chasing down a pack of smaller jackal-like creatures. And you're like, that is not standard herbivore behavior, but whatever. And then just a couple days later, you see something else that is tearing apart or feasting on the remains of that herd of stag that you saw, and seeing some of that odd back and forth would be very interesting.
It could also be that they are absorbing the lesser creatures that they come across, like not just eating them, but like actively bringing them into their bodies. So like the stags that you see chasing down those jackals one day, maybe a few days later, you see the herd again and they have jackal heads in addition to their stag heads.
Yeah.
And then that's where the multi-headed chimera come in.
Yeah.
There you go. You get the iconography there. Yeah. One thing though, right? One thing I do want to point out, I want the body horror aspect to be because what I hate in like body horror is when like the character's like, what's this change that's happening? Oh no. It's like you should know pretty quickly, like, oh, that's fucked up and awful, and I know what to expect, right? So I want there to be some level of self-awareness, and I want there to be some level of choice that has to be made, right? Again, it's like the only way I can survive is by becoming a monster. And the question becomes, is that survival? Is that acceptable? Like that kind of thing.
And if we're talking in terms of a larger narrative, I think that would be a very interesting arc to pursue, where they're finding that they're being outpaced. So they're having to take some of the capabilities of this creature into themselves so that they in turn can adapt and adjust. But then that starts to feed, basically that feeds into the natural cycle of this environment where they're at, where they have just entered themselves into that standard cycle of predator-prey evolution. And then there's more of that choice, which it's a shitty choice of just like, we're going to be wiped out, or we can take this and try and adapt like this. And I don't know. That's
I like the idea. I have this vision in my head. Like I'm a very visual thinker, where like there is this moment where they manage to take down one of the predators, and then they realize we have to eat this thing. And so like there's this slow horror that comes over them as they're biting into like raw, uncooked chimera flesh. And, you know, like maybe the other people in the group realize what's happening and then they just bolt because they're like, that person's going to change. Like they have made their choice and we need to get away from them type thing, you know, where it's, but I mean, yeah, that's kind of the fun thing. It's like, does one person sacrifice themselves in order to become the ultimate chimera? Kind of like what Courtney was saying, right? Like, does one person become the avatar and not like the Aang avatar, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
In order for you to,
you had one person in your group who decided to become a chimera to help protect you against the other organisms. But then it becomes this whole thing of like, yeah, we need them to evolve and be able to defend us, but we don't want them to go too far, or they're just going to be another problem and we have lost them completely.
And then there's obviously the one guy who's way too excited to be a chimera, you know, like that's also the other thing, right? Where he's like, maybe he's been like eating food on the side and he's like hiding the changes that he's been undergoing or something like that, you know,
experimenting how much control they have over the changes.
There you go. Yeah.
There could also be elements of self-mutilation. Like you see these changes starting to occur in yourself and you don't want it to happen. And the only way that you can think to fix that in this moment on a foreign planet with limited tools is to cut it out of yourself.
Yeah.
Peel stuff off of you or all of that.
Yeah. Like you eat something that has like tentacles or spines or something like that. And you realize like, oh, and maybe at first it's like, oh no, eating this thing gave me a disease. And so like you start pulling away the spines or the, you know, like the growths, and you realize that they're now part of you. And it's like, oh no, this is way worse. Because now like they keep growing back, even though like, you know, it's been days or something like that. Yeah, that's horrifying. I like that.
And going back to the choice, there could be a thing that maybe they have the medical devices that can excise it. It's painful and not always effective, but then there starts to be that decision on an individual level of like, well, this seems useful though. If you had a thing where you did start growing chitin along one arm and you're like, well, I don't really like this, but I also remember 2 days ago when we were facing those wolf creatures, I could have just had them latch onto an arm and been fine, you know, starting, especially if they start to see some of the advantages of the changes, then it's like, well, I don't like that I'm changing, but it's keeping me alive. And do I get rid of it? Do I keep it?
Absolutely. Clark, here in my brain, right? I'm thinking about this as like kind of a long form novel now. And I'm thinking that the first time they encounter the wolf creatures, one person gets their arm like shredded down to like ribbons, right? And then they're like, oh, well, we found some kind of crustacean thing. And after eating it, their arm, which was previously like shredded meat, now like kind of develops this chitin. And then the next time they encounter the wolf things, they put up their chitinous arm and they realize like, oh, I have power now, right? Like I am not a defenseless thing to be shredded and used like meat, you know, like it's a tragedy. And then all of a sudden that switch gets turned on. And they're like, wait, I'm a predator now, you know, like that kind of like, oh no, that's bad that you've thought that, you know, that kind of thing.
And another thing in kind of the vein of some of the self-mutilation sort of is then there is almost a drive to experiment with the dangers of the world.
Oh yeah.
So that you can then better adapt yourself to survive them when they happen unintentionally. So it being like, well, I'm going to put my foot in this thing, with a plan to like cut my foot off or whatever if something goes wrong. So we know what this does, and we can then adapt ourselves to make it not a problem in the future.
Mm.
This is a multi-million-dollar like movie franchise, and I'm naming it Apex, and I don't care. Yeah. All right. I feel like we've mucked around in this particular area long enough. I feel like it's time that we can move on.
Sounds good.
Let's see. We've still got Chimera. Let's recontextualize it. We've got sci-fi, horror, body horror nonsense. So what does a change in genre do to a Chimera? Our genre this time is going to be, it's a good old space western. All right.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with a good old space western. So the theme this time is going to be, Courtney, we've got secrets.
Okay.
We've got secrets as our theme. And the first thing we're focusing on with this Chimera is a villain. So, Courtney, get us started. We've got a villain with a secret, and we're in a space western. What do you got for us?
As an aside, I guess the historic event in the last one was just them crashing on the planet?
We did not do the historic event for the last one at all, did we?
I mean, we talked about so many things that could have been major turning points.
Sure.
I think
it was the crashing, I guess.
Yeah, it was the crashing is exactly what the historic event was. Yes. Courtney, you're 100% correct about that.
Discovery of the planet, historic event.
There you go. Look, we just created 2 historic events. Wow.
Great job.
That's crazy. Courtney, what about the villain though?
Let's see. With a space western, like typically that's frontier planets like Firefly, that sort of thing.
A little bit of Star Wars in there, sure.
A little bit, yeah.
Some Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, Cowboy Bebop, yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering if there is a biotech firm from one of the inner civilized planets that has basically taken over a planet to do experimentation on, and they are developing some sort of chimera-ish life form there.
Sure. Here's where I'm going to throw in a caveat or a little mini tenet. I want to make sure that in our space western, the horror is on the Chimera, and that this isn't the type of human hybrid program. So that's the one, like, okay, let's make sure that it's not a human hybrid program. Let's make sure that it's something else, you know?
Yeah, no, that works for me. Cool. I feel like the human hybrid made sense for last time because body horror
I completely
very
agree.
Much ties into that. But yeah, I'm cool with keeping this pretty separate. Like maybe they're trying to develop some, I don't know, why would they be trying to develop a horrific chimera creature?
I mean, if you're dealing with Westerns, right, a big livestock tend to be a really big part of it, domesticated life forms. So maybe they're trying to create some of the, rather than the ultimate predators, they're trying to create the ultimate domesticated frontier animal.
Yeah, like the most profitable, most amount of meat.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been the kind of like, not real, but like, okay. When we talk about like KFC or like, you know, like genetic breeding for fast food, right? There's always that like one who's like, oh, you know that KFC uses chicken that have like 4 wings and 6 breasts, right? You know, like that's obviously bullshit, but it feels real enough where you're like, maybe I should Google it, make sure that that's not actually a thing, you know? Like, I feel like we're going to take that to a maximum extreme here and be like, well, we've got our cow, chicken, pork hybrid, right? Where you can get bacon, steak, and eggs all in one animal, which actually, holy shit, that's like a complete breakfast right there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Is basically, because especially going to Firefly, it's a lot about, there's a lot of smuggling different goods. So I'm like, what kind of stuff could they create that would be valuable to sell and smuggle to distant locations?
Yeah. And one thing I think we can kind of put a pin in here is that just because the monster itself is the centerpiece of the episode, it doesn't mean that it has to be like a vicious or violent thing. Like, I think that we just need to center the narrative around it. And I like
Mhm.
the idea that it's not a vicious predator. It's this kind of like semi-tragic figure, like, oh,
Yeah.
this corporation's gone too far and it's creating a being that is just, there for suffering, basically.
Yeah, we could do something too with like you take current present day Earth and how vegetarian diets are being seen as much more sustainable with
Mm-hmm.
linking in climate change and the amount of land that livestock farming takes up
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And so maybe that is kind of the culture of the galaxy or whatever amount of space that we're dealing with here is like they have for moral and or sustainability reasons mostly converted to like a primarily plant-based diet. So this is like the biotech firm is trying to profit off of people's desire for having meat
Mm.
again, and
Yeah.
obviously they're trying to hide what exactly that meat is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Because one of the things that comes up a lot in sci-fi, which is just a great idea, is just vat grown meat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that becomes a lot more effective, but that only would work in a place where you have the infrastructure to do it. So maybe this animal is supposed to be the frontier replacement of that.
Mm.
And at risk of it being too cliche, but maybe doing some sort of regeneration process or even something where it's like a weird, this is going to sound crazy, but a weird cow starfish hybrid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you just cut off one of the legs, it will grow back.
Yeah. I love it. It makes me think of, and I forget if I brought this up on the Gross Jam that we did or on another episode, but the Oryx and Crake chicky knobs, which were like,
You did, in fact, bring that up in another episode because I
Yeah.
remember that very distinctly.
it's like these biotech GMO flesh plant like things that are live. They're living pieces of chicken, but
Mhm.
they don't look like chicken anymore at all.
Right. Well,
Interesting.
okay. So that was in our legally
Right,
distinct
yes.
BioShock episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
That ended up being disgusting
Oh,
on a
yeah,
certain
that
level,
was-
like close to the Gross Jam, I would say. if not
Talking
more.
about body horror, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we should do though, because right now, right, it's secrets and it's a space western, but I'm not getting a lot of that space western flavor, right? We've got corporations, we've got like the idea of like a roundup and stuff like that, or like maybe like a cattle drive or something like that. But like where's the western bit coming in? Where's the secrets coming in? Like we've got like vague corporate secrets like that are trying to hide the existence of this thing from the public. Frankly, I don't buy it. I feel like the public would just be like, yeah, whatever, we don't care. Like, oh, our meat comes from a giant cow hybrid. Okay, cool. Does it taste good? All right, great. I don't care. Like I feel like there's a level of apathy that's being created there. And I'm kind of curious to kind of push back on that and like explore what that can mean and add in some more of the space westerny stuff.
Yeah, like I was picturing it being on this like backwater frontier type of planet that sure it doesn't have a whole lot of contact with the more populous center planets, but there are still people living there, and I get the sense that the biotech company is like they're basically trying to use the entire planet as their breeding ground for this livestock.
Yeah, I think I can jive with it a little bit if you'll let me. How about this, right? So I like the idea that this super premium meat, right? Everyone's used to vat grown stuff at this point in the space western, right? They're used to rehydrating chicky nuggies and like getting all their nutrients that way. The future that Daniel wants, right?
Yes.
However, for the super rich, there is this like, oh, do you want real meat like from an animal? Guess what? We've got you. And they tell them it is this, like real livestock. That's this amazing thing. It's like it's kind of like real organic grass-fed beef type stuff. And in reality, it's these weird chimera things. And so maybe the secret isn't, that, we're feeding into the multiverse. It's like, no, we're cheating clients, like rich people out of money. And that's where like things kind of get a little dicey, and that's where the conflict is. We narrow that scope even further to be like a rich client got pissed off and now he sent his like leg breakers and bounty hunters to go and like bust up this operation,
And I do feel that might still be getting a little away from the Western.
Mhm.
But part of what I was thinking is, yeah, if it's primarily for the rich, you've then created a target for basically space cattle rustlers, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
They're gonna be raiding the shipments, they're gonna be taking these supplies, and then it becomes a very Firefly thing of like, we had a good haul, but now we have to find the right place to sell it
Right.
because these are genetically coded things, and if we take it to a place that's too close to the core, they're gonna run a sample, and then we're gonna get got.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of like the Monsanto, like
Right,
we
yeah.
have like copyright genes and seeds and stuff like that, except that, but with designer beef, you
Right.
know?
Patented cow
And the people in the
starfish.
frontier don't care because they're like, oh, this is good meat. And like,
Yeah.
we're just glad that you're bringing us good meat. And it becomes this very weird sort of noble cowboy thing of like, yeah, we're breaking the law, but come on.
Yeah, no, I'm cool with that. Like, I like the idea that real meat, even though it's like chimera meat, right, is still seen as like a super luxury and like something for rich folks. And so when these, like these cattle rustlers come by and it's like, hey, we got some stolen meat, and they, you look at this weird like cow, pig, chicken hybrid, and they're like, oh, that's gonna be good. It's gonna be real tasty when we eat it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you could even go to the point where maybe you can get a license to have one of these creatures and you become a local distributor. And then there's that whole thing of if there's a family that is out on the frontier and they were able to save up and pull strings and get one of these creatures that they're responsible for and distributing it, and then people come steal it.
Yeah. Make that story even smaller, where it's like you are the children of the owner who, like, one day you come home, you find Pa's been beat up, maybe he's like in a coma, and then it's like your job to go and find out who did it and get your one chimera cow back. That's really good, actually. I love that idea because it's got a very Unforgiven vibe to it, where it's just like the past came back to haunt Pa or something like that. Maybe Pa was a cattle rustler and
stole it in the first place.
Yeah, he stole it in the first place. Yeah. But he went straight after that, like this one cow is the one that made him go straight, for whatever reason.
And he's just been harvesting from the same cow for the past 40 years.
Yeah.
And that could go in a whole route where the people who like wronged you and stole it are actually people who were lawfully hired by the organization to get their stolen property back.
Yeah, exactly. And because you're like on a frontier planet, it's just taken him like 20 years to get caught up with him and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And because of where you are, the people are like, we don't care about the law. We don't care about your rights. We need our livestock back.
Right. It's like, we don't care. Jim is a good man. He's been feeding this community for generations. Like that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you have this scene at the end where it's like our heroes are like battered and bruised, and then all of a sudden the town comes out to like have their backs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's good. I'm in. I'm totally sold. I'm buying a ticket. I'm good.
Except since we're dealing with a super high-tech biotech corporation, they probably just fucking nuke the planet or something.
Yeah, obviously. It's like, oh, does that one planet have one of our cows? Cool, we're gonna nuke it from orbit. Fuck you.
Yep.
I don't know. It might turn into a thing where part of the ending is they're like, okay, fine, you can keep it, but only if you become like officially incorporated with us.
And give us like X% of everything you harvest.
Yeah, it's like, you guys aren't worth the trouble. Like, we don't have any shipment out here. We don't have any of this stuff. So tell you what, if you agree, you've been doing it pro bono for years. If you agree to charge people a paltry sum and send us that money, you can keep it.
I also like the idea that like the deed or the lease to this animal is also like won in a card game or like lost in a game of chance or something like that. You know what I mean? Just to really amp up the like Western nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have y'all ever seen the movie Maverick?
No.
Okay. Never mind then. Listeners, if you've watched the movie Maverick starring Mel Gibson, let me know. We can chat about it on Discord.
How old is that one?
Oh, 90s probably, before he was anti-Semitic.
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah, where he's doing the poker tournament. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's Okay,
Been
that's
a
a
while.
weirdly dumb and fun movie. It's like, I don't remember it being very good. I remember it being like kind of fun though, but it's been like ages since I saw it. So I couldn't tell you. I just remember the very end and that like, it was a dope scene, admittedly. Right. But not to spoil it, not going to spoil it, obviously, because Courtney's going to go watch this immediately once we're done recording.
Clearly.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think that's two very different and very cool scenarios that you can get with Chimera. Do we have any parting words or anything else that we want to talk about the Chimera in general before we close out the episode?
No, I just like how, in the first one, it was like very much the predatory aspect. The Chimera themselves were the horrifying things. And then in the second one, it's like, they're just weird cows.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that I'd really like to emphasize with the Monster Mash episodes as well, is that like, you can use monsters in all sorts of different ways. They don't always have to be like the thing that your players fight, right? Or the thing that you need to be afraid of in the narrative. It's like, nah, sometimes they're just like cow things that you're going to eat, right? Or they're going to be like a beast of burden for a community or something like that. Or they're going to be, like in the case of something like a vampire, it's like, yeah, what happens if you are the vampire and like you're just protagonist, and oh wait, we have entire subgenres where that's the case, of course,
Or even just things where it's like a boy and his dog, but here it's a boy and his monster. You can do that whole thing.
Yeah. Woo. All right. Yeah, this was a fun one, y'all. I had a lot of fun with this.
I like the space cow.
Yeah, space cow for sure. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I really enjoyed that bit. All right, we're gonna call it there. So Clark, thank you so much for guest hosting with us as per usual. Can you remind the friends, the people, the listeners where we can find you and your content?
Absolutely. My most recent stuff is on YouTube on the channel The Magic Engineer. I haven't been great about getting that translated over to my website, but I have a lot of older content on crrowenson.com, which is also where you can email me and reach out to me. Or if you want a bunch of other extra stuff, you can find my newsletter on my website, or I do have a Patreon account where as I'm building up the community, I'm going to be doing more live Q&As and potentially some fun game nights and stuff like that.
Not to mention a book that you can find as well. At least one, maybe more now, right?
Yeah, there's 2 books on Amazon, and hopefully I'm not spilling the beans too early, but I'm working on a video course specifically on how to create a magic system.
Hey, there we go. Cool. Well, that'll be in the future. Like that doesn't exist until Clark's on to promote it the next time he's on. Okay.
That's fair.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on Twitter at Let's World Build, or you can come follow us on Discord and chat with us directly about Maverick, about whether or not you want more monster matches, or, just about anything else in particular. If you're feeling particularly generous, of course, you can always go to our Patreon, where we've got all sorts of interesting and good, there's some good content over there on the Patreon. So give it a listen, right? When you get a chance, or not. No pressure either way. We appreciate it though. Anyway, that's going to be it. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.